Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
Furious, enraged customers. Some of us have tried to deal with them. Some of us have even been them. So how can we better manage and take back control of these uncomfortable confrontations? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. They're the frontline staff's worst nightmare, the angry customer. It's hard not to take it personally when you're on the receiving end of an emotionally charged tirade. So how do you calm down a difficult customer and ensure they adopt a more reasonable tone? We ask customer service guru Monique Richardson, who spent 20 years helping businesses improve customer engagement. Her book, titled Managing Difficult Customer Behaviour, outlines strategies to help teams prepare for a potential confrontation. Monique tells Chris Ashmore that there are three parties responsible for customers' behaviour. The first one, she says, includes the business owner.
Both organisations and leaders have a really important responsibility to be able to make sure that they have got really clear policies and procedures in place to be able to support their team in managing difficult customer behaviour. So particularly policies and procedures around unacceptable customer conduct, what will happen if a customer does express that unacceptable customer conduct, but also leaders especially need to make sure that they are going to be able to support their team, to be able to provide them with training, with coaching, and also with debriefing if they've had one of those really, really tough interactions, as well as making sure they're available for escalations. The second core area of responsibility is around team members, and that is how they respond to the difficult customer behaviour. And that third area of responsibility is actually around the customer. And so customers need to be aware that they also have a responsibility in how they respond to the team member that will be handling their issues. So that respect and that courtesy needs to be there, and they also need to be really clear about when they could potentially be infringing on the rights or the safety and well-being of the team member that they're interacting with.
And how would a customer know what their responsibility is? Is this where you might have something posted or displayed on the shop window?
Yeah, so it could be on the shop window, it could be in signage, it could even be on the website where there would actually be a policy outlining that unacceptable customer conduct. I think if you go into a number of retail stores, it could be hospitals or health settings, they'll often have signage that will actually say to the customer that our team members must be treated with respect and courtesy, and often those consequences if that behaviour does escalate, which is really great to be able to see.
Now, what can you do then, whether it's on the phone or face-to-face, when confronted by an angry customer?
The first recommendation I always make to team members is to just stop and breathe. And there's a real reaction that happens when we're first faced with that really angry or upset customer, and that's that fight and flight response. So initially, what happens is if that customer's really angry or upset or even abusive, this fight and flight response kicks in, and that can look like the shaky hands or feeling sweaty, heart rate increasing, feeling sick to the stomach, and there's this whole physiological reaction going on, which sometimes people think, I'm not great at dealing with difficult customer behaviour, when they need to recognise this is our body's physiological way that we respond to any threat. And so when they're feeling those initial feelings, if they can just stop and just focus on their breathing, so using that box breathing technique of just breathing in for 4, holding for 4 and then breathing out, even if they're in front of the customer or on the telephone or they get that email or message on Messenger. That way, if we can stop and pause, we can then control our response, but it also helps to be able to get oxygen back into our brain, which means we can think more clearly.
What kind of strategy do you suggest businesses can adopt to help prepare for a difficult customer situation?
I think one of the first things is really about training. So we need to make sure that businesses provide their teams with training so that they have got the skill set to be able to deal with that. So one of my techniques that I always talk about in any training or any complaint handling or difficult conversations is a well-known method called the HEAT method. And that's really about 4 steps. So the breathing at the start, and then the very first step is hearing the customer out. So just letting them talk, just letting them vent their frustration, actively listening while the customer's talking or venting. It could be taking notes if it's over the phone, but just letting the customer know that we're listening, be that through some verbal nods, but we just let the customer just let it all out. And once they've vented their frustration, it's usually the first step to be able to de-escalate some of their behavior. The next step that I would always recommend is empathizing, and that is where we want to be able to provide an emotional connection to the customer. So when things go wrong, customers will often talk about how they're feeling, and they'll say things like, I'm so frustrated or I'm so angry. And if we jump straight into problem solving, we've missed the chance to emotionally validate how the customer's feeling, and then they often keep talking for even longer. So a really genuine, sincere empathy statement, something like, look, I can appreciate that you're really frustrated, that there has been a delay in getting back to you, is just going to provide that validation to the customer. In some cases, the next step's going to be the apology, and there are some situations when apology is genuinely warranted. So I'm so sorry that this has happened for you. I'm sorry that this has happened to your order, whatever the case may be. But again, the apology can sometimes just be enough for the customer to feel heard. Once we've dealt with the emotion of the situation, the customer is then going to be in a position to then be able to deal with the situation on a more logical level. So then we would move to asking questions. And I always recommend using a technique called seeking permission. And I would then say to the customer, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? The customer, I've never had them say no, but I would then start asking them some questions about what's gone on for them. And then that final step is really around taking ownership. If they're angry and something's happened or they're expressing difficult behavior, we want to focus on solutions and what can we do to help this customer. So we take ownership to look at what we can do to resolve it, which we might be able to do on the spot, which is great, an immediate resolution. We fix whatever's gone wrong. It may also mean that we need to do some follow-up to then be able to do some actions, find something out, speak to another area, in which case we would always make a promise and then get back to that customer. And so there can also be a tougher situation where we may not be able to deliver what the customer actually wants. But the ownership piece is how we take ownership for resolving that issue for the customer.
If there's ever a situation where a customer is unhappy, clearly unhappy, and they ask for something and you simply cannot give a yes, is there a way to say no to a customer without making the situation worse?
It's a really important skill, Chris, because if we are in a position where we have to say no to a customer, I think that is probably the toughest area of all. They're already angry, they're already upset, but then we do have to say no. That could be because of privacy reasons, it could be because of legislation, it could be because of legal, financial. Unfortunately, in service, we can't always give the customer what they want. So I recommend a 3-step process. The first step is always looking at alternatives and options. So what alternatives do we have? What options can we offer the customer? And I always suggest to be able to recommend those first. So we're focusing on what we can do. So another option could be, another alternative could be, and we share that with the customer. If we cannot, there's no options, no alternatives, nothing that we can do, my suggestion is always to be able to explain the reason why. And even just using that language of the reason why we're unable to ... so that we can provide the education opportunity for the customer. Because if they don't know, we need to be able to inform them and to provide an explanation. And the final step is if we can't do what the customer wants and we can't deliver, is just simply to empathise and even to say something like, look, I'm really sorry that there's nothing further that we can do, or I've explored all options for you and unfortunately there isn't anything further we can do, and I do appreciate that's not the answer you're looking for. At least can help the customer move to some level of acceptance.
Are there any particular words we shouldn't use when dealing with an emotional customer?
Yes, I think there's the trigger words and phrases. I'll probably start with calm down. I don't think anybody's ever calmed down by being told to calm down. Also, avoiding words and phrases, I think particularly around the empathy, things like, oh, I know how you feel. That customer that then's going to come back and go, you've got no idea how I feel. Things like, we can't do that, you should have done that. Any of the you language can really ignite a customer. So I think we've got to be very conscious of the language that we use, the words that we choose to use, so that we don't ignite the customer even further.
What about words that could be helpful?
Definitely. So see, I just used one. So things like definitely, any of those can do words and phrases. Let me see what we can do. I love let me help you with that. Let me look into that for you. Even things like to be able to use some of those positive words and phrases of, I'll take care of this for you. I'll look into this for you. I can hear this is really frustrating. Those genuine, sincere empathy statements, they can really make a big difference to the customer. So particularly focusing on what we can do in those situations makes a really, really big difference.
Now, what if a customer crosses the line and is abusive or offensive, unacceptably offensive?
So my recommendation, if we started, for example, with over the telephone, if a customer was using, for example, offensive language directed at me, I would always recommend offering to help straight away and using something like, if I had the customer's name, I would use the name, Mr. Jones, I really want to be able to help you with this and I can hear that you're frustrated, but if I can please just ask if you can refrain from using that language. It's a really non-threatening way to be able to ask that customer to stop. If Mr. Jones decided to keep going, I would then say, Mr. Jones, as I said, I really want to be able to help you. I can hear you're frustrated, but if you do choose to continue to use that language, I will have to end this call. Delivered in a really calm manner. And even those words of, if you choose to, it's still letting the customer know this is their choice. And if Mr. Jones continued to swear or make those comments, I would say, Mr. Jones, I'm now going to end your call. And that would be it. I would then recommend informing a manager or team leader, making those notes. Again, particularly for face-to-face, this is where we have to be even more careful because that can escalate very quickly in a face-to-face situation. And there can also be the potential for that physical threat or violence. So my overarching recommendation is that if somebody is feeling in any way that there is a threat to their safety, well-being, or safety of others, I wouldn't even go into recommendations. I would look to go through that escalation path, be that grab a manager, press the duress button, calling security, calling police. So first and foremost, everybody is safe. But there might be an instance just with a warning that the customer's behaviour ceases.
When it comes to handling difficult customer behaviour, it can be difficult to not take things personally, can't it? Do you have any tips on how to reset yourself after a situation?
My recommendations for not taking it personally, and particularly for being able to continue on throughout the day, is to always just to remind yourself that the customer is nearly 99.9% angry at the process, at the product, at something that's happened. We have to be able to make sure that we can remind ourselves that it's not anything that we personally did. So we're going to make a choice not to take that personally. If we also then still feeling affected by it, I think one of the greatest things I ever learned from hearing this from Tony Robbins was the 90-second rule. And he talks about that if you ever have an incident or something happened and you're feeling still really angry about it and so on, you're choosing to hang on to that. So he just recommends just letting yourself get angry and upset about it for 90 seconds and choosing to let it go. If we find ourselves still feeling affected by it, and particularly for those really difficult, tough ones where the customer may have been really abusive or very aggressive, that is also where debriefing can be very, very important. So it may be initially talking to a colleague or maybe even a leader, and in some of the most challenging of circumstances, professional debriefing can also support team members for those particularly tough interactions.
That was customer service expert Monique Richardson. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily Podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.